Hey Jer, enjoyed your video. I agree with your thoughts about this false dichotomy between science and religion. Not that there isn't a difference between science and religion, but that to assume that they're somehow inherently incompatible is false, I would say. You can be scientifically educated and spiritual at the same time. And I think, as you pointed out, the problem is that intelligent design is a philosophy. So is materialism, scientific materialism. These are philosophical interpretations of scientific empirical observations. Now, of course, there are no observations of facts that aren't already interpreted, laden with certain values, given certain perspective by the observer. We can't ever avoid that. Even science is, in that sense, still embedded in a cultural discourse of some sort. We are biological organisms. Scientists are biological organisms. They've devised various technological extensions to filter out their own biases. But at the end of the day, science is a cultural activity, and so it's not entirely objective. But so long as we stick to the very strict outlines of the scientific method, we can keep interpretation, philosophical, metaphysical baggage to a minimum, at least when we're doing science. Now, when it comes to actually trying to understand what science shows us about the phenomenal world, the world of experience, sensory experience, of course we've got to start using philosophy. We've got to try to interpret it, otherwise none of the scientific data has any meaning. Now, a scientific materialist, as you said, gives a meaningful interpretation to scientific data. The question is, though, is it a coherent interpretation? Or does it create an unnecessary or incoherent dualism? That's my problem with scientific materialism. Because yes, on the one hand, much of the physical, inorganic world can be understood very well in a mechanistic way. It's more in dispute or up for discussion as to whether we can account for life mechanistically, but it's quite obvious we can't account for mind mechanistically. So I don't think scientific materialism is an adequate interpretation of scientific facts, because it requires that we foist this dualism upon nature, or that we bifurcate nature into the human realm of subjectivity, of literature and meaning and purpose and value and so forth, and art and aesthetics, and then there's this just bare void nature that just is. How is it then in such a universe that the human being ever came into existence? Science becomes unable to explain that. Because here's the thing, I think, from a more integral point of view, science, or our interpretations of science, should be such that science itself, as an activity, as a way of knowing, should be explicable within a scientific picture. So in other words, if we have to completely chop off the connection between the observer and the observed, in other words, if the human being has to be understood as entirely outside of nature and unlike nature in every respect, in that the scientist has a desire to know, which is a value of some sort. It's a moral imperative, and the scientific materialist would say, but nature has none of that. If that's what our interpretation of science requires, then it's incoherent. We need to be able to fit science itself as a human activity into our picture of the cosmos. Now, when it comes to intelligent design, I'm not sympathetic to that perspective either, because really it almost seems to be an equally over extreme reaction to the opposite extreme, which is this atheistic materialism. It's almost as though the new atheists and scientific materialism and intelligent design were made for one another, because when it comes to evolution, they both begin looking at the problem of how life emerged and diversified from within the same teleological paradigm, the same paradigm of design. Now, a Darwinian would say that it's nature which designs. Intelligent design says that no, it's God or an intelligence of whatever sort. But it's still the paradigm is the same, and so they're more alike than different. And we have other options when it comes, other paradigms that we can view the biological world from, that I think avoid the implications of a design paradigm, which is that no matter whether you're an intelligent designer or a Darwinian, the organism is understood to be a machine designed from the outside, from a more organic perspective, like that of Immanuel Kant. Organisms are understood as self-organizing. So there's autonomy and purpose that's immanent in the organism itself. That doesn't even come into the picture at all in the design paradigm. So I would want to start with the Kantian presupposition that life is inherently self-organizing and intrinsically purposeful. It produces its own purposes, and they don't have to be imposed on it from the outside, whether from a god or from this abstract conception of a pre-existing environment with niches just waiting out there for organisms to fit into based on differential survival. So I think the problem with both of these positions, the scientific materialist and the intelligent designer, is obsessive abstraction. The feeling of being an organism is completely lost, and each of us has access to this feeling. And knowing what it's like to be an autonomous living being is enough, I think, to recognize that the design paradigm is somehow it's getting off on the wrong foot. We're beginning with the wrong assumptions about what an organism is. An organism isn't a machine, because organisms have perspectives of the world from within and purposes which are self-manifesting rather than put together and designed from the outside. So I think that we've got to completely throw out this false dichotomy and begin again with how we actually experience life as human organisms, and then extrapolate based on our own experience to the rest of the biological world. So yeah, hopefully that makes some sense. Thanks for your videos, Jared. I'm going to go watch the other one you posted earlier and see what sorts of thoughts it sparks in me. So thanks for listening. Take it easy.